Hello and welcome back to Motherhood's Unexpected Path. Today I'm going to share with you Asher's birth story. Asher was due on January 8th, 2015. But because of his condition, my OB didn't know if my placenta would fail early, so she did not want me going all the way to 40 weeks because it would pose too much of a risk and she couldn't closely monitor me enough that she was comfortable. So we had scheduled Asher's due date to be January 2nd, 2015. That would have put him at 39 weeks and 1 day gestation. So on New Year's Day, I had taken the day off of work because I wanted time to prepare so that way I could get well rested, or I thought so I could get well rested for surgery. It turns out it was like 11 o'clock at night and I still hadn't gone to bed yet. And I was uncomfortable, my back hurt, my feet hurt. I was just tired, but couldn't sleep. So finally I laid down to go to sleep, and then next thing I know, I'm awake at 3:30 in the morning, and because I have to get up and get showered and get ready for surgery because I had to be at the hospital at 5:30 in the morning, so that meant I had to leave around 4:30 from my house to get there in enough time, because it's about 40 minutes to get from our house to the hospital that we were delivering at. So I got up at like 3:30. I was awake. I wasn't really out of bed yet, and my back was just killing me. And I remember just thinking, oh, this is just the aches and pains of pregnancy. It's going to be over in a few hours. And so I got up and I got in the shower, and I just remember letting the hot water just hit my back and just trying to relax the muscles in my back, and nothing was helping. So I get out of the shower, I get dressed, my husband, I get him up at the last possible minute so he could get as much sleep as possible, and we get loaded up and we get in the car and head to the hospital. So on our way to the hospital, we were getting onto the highway and I felt this intense pain, and it was just so weird. I'm like, wow, that was something else. I had a lab Braxton Hicks during my pregnancy, and it's just like this big, wide elastic band that wraps all around your belly and all around your back, and it just gently kind of squeezes, and then it'll relax and it kind of squeezes. But this pain was different. It just hit in my stomach and just grabbed, and I was like, whew, that was weird. And I remember talking to one of my coworkers. She was a labor and delivery nurse. She said, honey, when you have real contractions, you'll know. And her telling me that just popped in my head. And I was like, I think these are like actual contractions. And 5 minutes later, I had another one. And then 5 minutes later, I had another one. And I was kind of in denial that I was in labor, but in the back of my head, I was telling myself, you know you're in labor. And so I got to the hospital, and my contractions were becoming even more and more rhythmic, even more and more intense. And so when the nurses hooked me up, I said, hey, I think I'm in labor. And so they looked at the machine where they have you hooked up and they monitor your contractions, and they're like, yeah, those are solid contractions. Those aren't Braxton Hicks. And then next thing I know, I felt like a trickle of fluid. And I remember, this might be a little bit of overshare, but I remember thinking to myself, I know I did not just pee my pants. I mean, things go a little crazy during pregnancy, but I was like, I know that did not just happen. And so the nurses came in and they checked, and they're like, yep, that's amniotic fluid. And so my water was just slowly leaking. It hadn't fully ruptured yet. And so the nurses said at that time they wanted to see how far along I had progressed. And when the first nurse checked me, she was like, oh, well, I think I feel ahead. And I was like, That ultrasound machine right there is sitting there because he's been frank breech my entire pregnancy, and it's just there to double check, but I don't think he's flipped. I think I would have known if he had flipped by now. And so she was like, well, it's kind of hard since your water hasn't fully ruptured yet. So another nurse went to check, and she goes, oh, honey, yeah, that's definitely a butt, and you're almost 8 centimeters dilated. And so at that point, things kind of started moving quicker because they knew that Asher was going to try to come out butt first if they didn't do something quickly. And that wasn't a risk that we were prepared to take because with his condition, there was so much unknown that we didn't know if it would be safe to try to deliver him naturally. So that's why we had opted for the C-section. So they threw some scrubs at my husband. They said, put these on. We have to take her to the OR, and someone make sure the doctor's on the way. And so I get wheeled into the OR, they get my IV all hooked up, and I'm having these contractions. And I think I got in there between a shift change because I had one anesthesiologist. He was trying to get my spinal in to numb me from the waist down. And he was having a hard time because I was having contractions, and because I was so big from being pregnant, it was hard for me to round my back so he could get the needle where it needed to be. And he was like, you need to hold still. And I'm like, dude, I'm having contractions here. I'm trying. I'm like seriously trying. And the next thing I know, I hear someone over my left shoulder, and that person grabs my hand and she's like, you're gonna have to wait. She's in the middle of a contraction. And it was my OB. I was so happy to see her. And the anesthesiologist, he kind of just froze and waited, and she waited to see me relax and try to breathe after the peak of the contraction had ended. And she said, okay, now we can try again. And he wasn't getting it. So then another anesthesiologist had stepped in, and he took over to see if he could get it placed. One interesting thing about when they're placing the needle that I found out is helpful for them to know if you ever have one. I would get a shooting pain on my right side, like I could feel the pain to the right. And he said, if I get this just right, you shouldn't feel pain on either side. It'll be pressure, it'll be uncomfortable, but you shouldn't feel like pain. And so I would tell him, right, like it's hurting to the right, or left, it's hurting to the left. And so he was able to get my spinal in. And then they had me lay down on the operating table, and they're like, okay, we're gonna give you a chance to relax a little bit, and then we're going to make sure that your spinal took effect and that you're numb. And so next thing I know, they're like, do you feel that? Do you feel that? And I'm like, feel what? And they're like, you're numb. And it is the weirdest feeling when they numb you. It's just a warm sensation all in your body. And I remember trying to tell my toes to wiggle. I knew I was telling them to wiggle, but they weren't. So it's kind of a weird feeling. So next thing I know, my husband's coming in and he's sitting by my shoulder, and the anesthesiologist says, if you feel sick at any time, let me know. If anything's going on, just let me know. There's a lot of things I can do to help you. So if you feel nauseous or whatever happens, let me know. So they said, all right, it's time to get started. And mind you, my C-section wasn't supposed to start until 7:30. I got wheeled in there somewhere between 6:40 and 7 o'clock, I think, because based on when Asher was actually pulled out and born. So they cut me open and they start doing everything they need to do to get down to Asher. And I remember them having a hard time trying to get him out because I think his head was locked under my ribs because of how he was positioned in me. And I don't have a very long torso, So I remember them kind of really trying to get him out. And funny thing is, Matthew had said afterwards that he kind of like peeked over the little curtain that they have up so you can't see anything. He kind of took a quick peek over when they were getting ready to pull him out. And he said he saw them like lifting out this like gray ball. And he was like, did they just pull out her stomach? And the next thing, he's like, it was something out of like a sci-fi movie. He saw like this little arms and legs unfurling, and he's like, oh, that's my son. And so they got him out, and they got his cord clamped, and the doctor came around and she showed Asher to us real quick before he was handed off. And in the operating room, we had a neonatologist in the operating room because they wanted a doctor that knows a lot about neonates to evaluate him and make sure that he was doing well. Because with his condition, if he wasn't doing well, if his scores were really bad and it exceeded the knowledge and the machines that they had at the hospital I was delivering at, he was going to have to be life flighted to a higher level NICU. So that would have meant that Asher and I would have been separated. So the doctor started looking at Asher over, and he looked really good. He pinked up right away. He was crying right away. One thing that posed a challenge to us later that I'll talk about was he had a really weak suck reflex. And that knowing the things we know now, it kind of isn't that surprising because Asher has hypotonia, so he has low muscle tone. And so that was really the only thing that was really that was considered like bad on his initial scan. So he came out at 7:22 a.m. and he weighed 5 pounds, 12.9 ounces, and he was 17.5 inches long. One thing that was really hard for me about the C-section is I so badly wanted to hold him. So they got him looked over, they got his little footprints and stuff, and they had me do a fingerprint as well. They got his little ankle bracelet on, and they got him all bundled up like a little baby burrito, and they gave him to Matthew. And I remember him just like, you can just see the like dumbfounded look in his face. He is just in awe, just looking down at him and just like, wow, he's mine and he's here. And since he wasn't on oxygen, that was really good. I was really scared that he was gonna have to be just immediately put in an incubator, and that we wouldn't be able to hold him and touch him. So that was something that was really hard for me, and to be able to see Matthew holding him was so awesome. I mean, you carry your child for 9 months inside of you, and just to get to see your significant other holding your child for the first time is awesome. And I remember so badly wanting to hold him, and I was like, when am I going to be able to hold him? And they kind of brought him over for me to like kind of see him, but it was hard because you're laid out on the table. They don't necessarily strap down your arms, but when you're laying on the table, you're laid back and your arms are splayed out. And so I was allowed to like bring my hands like this, and I tried to like look at them and touch them and stuff. But it was really hard being in the position I was. I didn't want to move and screw up anything that they were doing, trying to get me sutured back up from the C-section. So I had to wait a while until they were able to get me transported from the operating table to a hospital bed. And once they got me on the hospital bed, they didn't want to sit me up right away, so I was laying down, and they gave them to me, and I was laying down on my back and I was holding them, but I still couldn't really see them. Once I got rolled into the recovery room, I wanted to do skin to skin because I knew that that was going to be beneficial for breast milk production because they really wanted to breastfeed him. And also it would be good for our bonding and his body temperature. Well, one thing was the operating rooms are kept really cold, so my body temperature was pretty low. So when I was doing skin to skin with them, his temperature wasn't staying where they wanted it to. So I didn't get to hold him very long before they wanted to take him and put him underneath of an incubator and warm him up a little bit. So at that point, Matthew went with Asher and they took him to the nursery to clean him up and to put him underneath of a warming lamp. And so that left me by myself in the recovery room. And then the next thing I know, I've been in there for a while and the nurses are coming to take me to my room that I'm going to stay in. And they start wheeling me down the hallway and they said, okay, cue the music. And at the hospital, they play a little lullaby song every time a baby is born. And so when I was wheeling down the hallway, I heard that lullaby playing, and it was so nice because my son was here and he was doing well, but at the same time it was hard because he wasn't with me. When I heard that, he was still in the nursery with Matthew. So I got wheeled down to my room, and then they wheeled Asher in. Matthew was with them and they gave him to me, and I was able to snuggle up with him. And I got to spend a few moments with him, and then we had our family there. So my mom was there, my dad was there, his wife was there, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my sister-in-law, and my brother-in-law. So there was a lot of people. Asher is the first on both sides. He's the first grandchild, so he was something pretty special to everyone. And so everyone came in to see him, and everyone was passing him around and holding him. And then I was able to get him back, and I was holding him, and I wanted to try to breastfeed him, but it wasn't really working because of his weak suck reflex. He wasn't really latching. So we had to wait for the lactation consultant to come down. So interesting thing though was, even though Asher was born on the 2nd, it turns out he was also the hospital's New Year's baby. Believe it or not, there was no babies born on January 1st, 2015 at the hospital that he was born at. So we had someone come in, and they had they make like a little gift basket for you if your child is the firstborn of the new year. And they were like, oh, and also a news crew wants to know if they can come in and interview you guys, since Asher is the first baby of the new year for the hospital. Come to find out, there was one other baby that was born before Asher in the county he was born in. She was born at the other hospital in that city, but they didn't want to, the parents didn't want to say anything or talk to the news crew or anything. So Matthew, he said yeah. He didn't really ask me about it. He just kind of decided, oh yeah, we'll talk to them. So next thing I know, I have just had major surgery. I haven't spent much time with my son yet, and I'm gonna have a news crew with a video camera coming into my hospital room. So my family will probably tell you and laugh at me, but I felt so out of my element. I wanted to look somewhat normal in my mind, so I had like my makeup with me. So I was putting on makeup because you can't wear makeup for a C-section because they want to monitor your color. So I'm putting on my makeup and trying to make my hair look presentable, but looking back, it was kind of a wasted effort because your face just gets so puffy from delivery. And it didn't help that I had already been in active labor before the C-section even started. But they came in and did a quick little interview with us and left. So that was kind of cool and interesting, something that will be nice to share with him when he gets older. And so after things had kind of calmed down that night, Asher stayed with us in the hospital room. My husband stayed with us as well on the very uncomfortable, like, sleeper sofa, cots, whatever you want to call them, that they have in the hospitals. And it was hard because of the C-section. I couldn't really reach over and get Asher. So every time he fussed, Matthew kind of tried to soothe him. And if he didn't soothe, then he would have to pick him up and give him to me, and I would try to feed him. Like I had said, he hadn't been breastfeeding, and it was even really challenging to bottle feed him. He would lock his tongue in the roof of his mouth, and we would literally have to take the bottle nipple up into his mouth and kind of like fish hook it in and push down on his tongue so he could be able to suckle properly. And so I was expressing breast milk. I was connecting to a pump, and I was pumping religiously for every 2 hours, because that was one thing that I knew I could control. Was I knew I could control the fact that I could connect to a breast pump for 20 minutes at a time every 2 hours to try to produce breast milk to feed my child, because there was so many things during this pregnancy that were taken out of my control. That was the one thing. I was like, I can control this. I, God willing, can produce enough breast milk to feed my child and give him the best I possibly can. So I was connecting every 2 hours, and then I was washing the pump parts and letting them dry and then connecting back up. So it was a lot, and the nurses kept on saying, honey, you don't have to do that, you can relax and stuff. And I'm like, no, I can't. He won't latch. I have to do this because I know that is critical for me to be able to establish my milk supply. So I just kept on connecting to that pump so I could feed him, and then the nurses would take my milk if I had any extra, and they would put it in the fridge for me. So I was just pumping and pumping and pumping. And so this went on for the first 2 days, and the second night, the nurses were like, honey, let us take him at least until his next feed. Take him to the nursery, let him rest so you get some rest. If you want us to bring him down to you for feedings, we can, or you can just give us your milk and we'll feed him in the nursery so you can try to get some rest. It turns out that was one of the best decisions I could have made that night. It scares me to think about what could have happened if I didn't send him to the nursery that night. So Asher, not only was he having a weak suck reflex, come to find out, he didn't have the whole suck, swallow, breathe, the rhythmic pattern that newborns naturally normally have. So he was having gagging episodes where he would kind of stop breathing, and it would cause his O2 levels to crash. So what had happened was 45 minutes after I had sent him to the nursery, I had actually sent Matthew home to get a good night's sleep. After I had sent him to the nursery, 45 minutes later, a nurse is coming to my room, and she said, honey, everything's okay now, but I'm coming to tell you that Asher needs to go to the NICU. And I was like, what do you mean he has to go to the NICU? Like, you're saying everything's okay, but what happened? And they told me that his O2 levels had crashed. They had gone down to the low 80s, and it was making him really uncomfortable. And so they brought him down to me, and I got to see him and hold him. They're like, he's okay. And I'm like, so they're like, all right, well, we're going to wheel him down there. And then once he's all settled, a nurse will let you know, and you can come down there to see him if you had want. Luckily, by this point, I was being really stubborn, and as soon as I was able to get up after my C-section, I did. I had already been walking to and from the restroom that day. So the challenge of walking down the 2 hallways to the NICU wasn't going to be quite as hard. But I still had to take it super slow. So they take him down to the NICU, and I call my husband to let him know what's going on. He asked me if I wanted him to come back. I said, no, it's fine. Stay home, and I will just update you as I know what's going on, and just try to come back as soon as you can in the morning. And so the nurse comes down and tells me that Asher's all settled, I can go see him. So I went to the NICU, and the NICU nurses were so sweet. And they let me hold him with his monitors on and stuff. And I did skin to skin with him in there. And they said, he's okay, we're gonna watch him. If anything comes up, we'll let you know. So I stayed with him for a while. You kind of lose track of time, and then I ended up going back to my room, getting some rest and pumping and resting and pumping. And then come morning, I ate, and then I went down, and I pretty much spent most of my time in the NICU with him over the next 3 days. Luckily, on the last day he was in the hospital, they were letting him come out of the NICU a lot longer periods of time. So he would come down to my room for feedings, and then they would take him back to the NICU and hook him back up to the monitors and everything. And so he had like 2 or 3 more episodes that night that it happened. So on the 3rd, he had 2 more episodes. And then by the time we were getting ready to leave the hospital on the 6th, we pretty much were just waiting for the doctor's okay on if he had passed all the little tests that babies have to pass before they're allowed to leave the hospital. So the doctor had cleared us to go home, and it was 7 o'clock at night. So Matthew had gotten the car and had it all warmed up and ready to go for us, and we got everything all loaded up in our little cart. I got sat in the wheelchair, and they put Asher in the car seat in front of me, and we wheeled down and got to the car and clipped him in, and we were on our way home. So that is Asher's birth story. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to see you at my next video. Bye.